we've talked about how good beauty is and how good God is and all that stuff, but what about the ugly side, right? The side where we're real. So I'm going to get real with you a little bit. Is that all right? So just to review, the first session was basically me saying beauty can be found everywhere. And you guys all took part in that. You helped me to describe beauty in lots of places. And all I said was saying that beauty displays God's glory, right? Right there. The second part is I'm saying that beauty is actually being itself. It's our appreciation of God's essence and light and being shining through things. And as long as you can recognize that the thing in front of you is a gift, then you'll be able to appreciate beauty for what it is. And then that beauty helps us to fall in love with God and with other people. Otherwise, you wouldn't kickstart this relationship with people, you know? And that leaves us to the fourth part. And I realized that I've only been doing theology and philosophy. I haven't actually done biblical studies yet. So I thought that today, since it's a Sunday, I would do a short sermon. Bless you. We're going to talk about Jesus walking on water. So if you have your digital Bibles, feel free to pull it out. We're going to be in Mark 6. And immediately he insisted that his disciples embark into the boat and precede him to the other side, to Bethsaida, until he dismisses the crowd. And having taken his leave of them, he went away to the mountain to pray. And when evening arrived, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was upon the land alone. And seeing them tormented in their rowing, for the wind was against them, he comes towards them at about the fourth watch of the night, walking on the sea. And he intended to pass them. But on seeing him walk upon the sea, they thought, "It's a phantom!" And they cried out, for they all saw him and were disturbed. Immediately, however, he spoke with them and says to them, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And he went to them up into the boat, and the wind ceased. And within themselves they were quite overwhelmingly astonished. Can you detect any sense of beauty in here? Or brokenness in here? I'm a hot mess, okay? This passage is instrumental in like saving me from depression about 3 months ago. 2 or 3 months ago. I felt called to start a PhD about 5 years ago in theology. And, the goal is to raise up Christian leaders in every field, to equip people to like serve God, to be servant leaders everywhere they're at. And I didn't realize how dumb I was until I started the PhD program. Like I was telling you, I got my MDiv and I thought I was so smart. I could talk about anything for hours. And then I got to the PhD program and I realized that I'm like one of the slower kids. And it's very intimidating talking to my professors. And it's also very discouraging talking to my classmates because they're so smart. They read so fast. They articulate themselves so well. They know how to write papers really good. And I have this constant sense of inadequacy. And a constant sense of doubting my ability, even my worth. If you can understand the plight of being me. It's been a grueling 5 years. Most of the time I was working full-time and studying full-time. And it was super tough. About a year and a half ago, Esther said, "You should just focus on your degree, otherwise you'll never finish." And she gave me the grace to do it. So, but the deadline was like, you got to finish within the year, Oh, it happened again. Not to worry. Yep, he got it.
He waited till John got right up there.
Crisis averted. Actually, that's how I feel. I stuck my head into the thing and I can't get out. The PhD is like that. There's a time crunch for me to finish this thing, and I have breached the time crunch, the deadline. And I felt super discouraged. I gave my first draft of my first chapter to my professor for my dissertation, and he like tore it apart in a very kind Christian way, you know. But you know, like when there's more red than black.
Yeah, you just dip it in red paint. But I love
Right.
it.
Yeah. I believe in you. Do you? He basically said you should fix the beginning, and you should change the end, and you should take out the middle. And I was like, what is there left? And that was back in October. So I've spent November, December rewriting a new chapter, basically. And I feel so discouraged. And I have a lot of despair. And things like, I would ask myself, would I ever finish? Would I ever get to this goal? Am I ever going to reach the destination? Maybe I should have never started. Maybe I should turn back. Maybe I should just quit. Maybe you've been follow some kind of call too, right? Maybe you're on some kind of journey as well. Maybe that journey is really tough. Maybe the winds are blowing at you and they're keeping you at a standstill. And you feel like you're rowing constantly, but you're getting nowhere. Maybe you're getting exhausted and straining at trying to push, but you're not going to get to your destination, or it's too far away and you want to quit. I hope that this story from Jesus encourages you in the same way it does for me. So here's the immediate context. Jesus just feeds 5,000 people. Like miraculously, with just a bit of bread and a bit of fish, he feeds a ton of people. The miracle shows you that Jesus can do anything. He can fulfill any need, right? And in the midst of great scarcity, Jesus is enough. Jesus can provide. And then he sends them off across the sea. The funny thing is that this journey should have taken a couple hours. It shouldn't have taken all night. And it's one thing I do observe from this verse is that he sends them off and he went away to a mountain to pray. So what does that mean? He doesn't go with them this time, right? Sometimes Jesus accompanies his disciples. Other times, he sends his disciples to do a thing, and he stays apart. So you are on your own. You have a task, you have a mission, and you don't have the immediate presence of God like really with you. You have the commission, but you don't have the presence, right? These are just observations that I've made on the passage. And when evening arrived, they were in the middle of the sea. So what does that mean? They didn't make the journey in the time that they should have, right? It's like twice as long, 3 times as long, we don't know. They've been rowing for hours. It's not like they're going to drown. It's not like the waves are crashing over them and that they're about to drown. It's more that they've been rowing for hours and hours, getting nowhere. And where is Jesus? Where is he at? In this verse, where does it say he's at? Yeah, he's on the shore. But the boat is like in the middle of the lake. Not the lake, the middle of the sea. How do you see the boat from being on shore? You can't. Not the average human. Jesus somehow has a supernatural ability to see across like the bend of the earth, right? He can see beyond the horizon. And the disciples don't see Jesus, but he sees them. So I think there's a lesson here. I think that even when we don't see God around, he sees us. And he'll come to us when we need him. Can I get it? Amen? He sees them in verse 48. He sees them tormented, struggling in their rowing. And like a lot of passages in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus has compassion for people who are hurting and struggling and broken. People who are, like in the midst of some kind of strife or conflict. I think he cares about them and he wants to be with them, right? I do notice this, that it says that for the wind was against them. Jesus didn't cause the wind. He wasn't like, make their way difficult, and then the wind stopped them in their tracks. it wasn't like a God-ordained event where the wind would blow against them because they needed to learn some kind of beautiful lesson. Rather, the wind was just blowing. That's all the text says. It's a plain fact. Nature is against us sometimes, right? Sometimes there's forces at play where you're trying to do your mission, you're trying to do your work, and things are against you. It's in those moments where God comes in and helps. You don't have to interpret it like, oh, God caused the wind so that he could stop it. He comes and stops it, right? So try to put yourself in the disciples' shoes. You've been rowing this whole time. What kind of thoughts do you think would like run through your head? Did
you ask what kind of thoughts the disciples had?
Yeah.
I'd be asking why he sent us out there.
Yeah.
There was room for you. Why didn't you come?
That's a good one. I didn't have that.
Might have been a little bit mad at him for like, oh, sure, you're having a little prayer time with God.
Yeah.
While we're going through this.
While we're dying.
Hope you enjoy your little spiritual retreat.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a lot of doubts. I was like, if I was in the boat, I'd be like, I don't deserve this. I didn't do this. I didn't do anything to deserve this. Why aren't you here with me? Why is this happening to me? Why is it so hard? It would have been better for me to stay on shore. Did Jesus really want us to go across the lake? What if he wanted us to go like over here to a closer port? Can't we turn back? We're going to die. These are the kind of thoughts that I would have, right, as a doubter. Have you ever had those kind of thoughts about whatever task that you're doing? You know, when you're panicking, when you're struggling, and you see no end in sight. I feel like we're all broken. We all lack faith. We all have doubts, and we're sorely inadequate for whatever challenges that come our way. The winds are against us a lot of times, and discouragement's real. So Jesus sees that. He sees our discouragement, and he comes towards them at about the fourth watch. It's crazy. I mean, Jesus is Jesus, right? He's healed people from a distance before, like with just a word, with just a hand wave, right? But why does he have to like walk on the water to them to bring the miracle? Why didn't he accomplish a miracle from a distance? I think that at least in this story, okay, backtrack. I think that there's a lot of storms that God like fixes without us even knowing. Like we just don't have the foresight or the perspective to see all of the tragedies that God's prevented from that we didn't even know. In this case, I feel like Jesus he wanted to be there so that they would know that when the wind ceased, it was because of him. Do you get it? Sometimes I think God makes us wait a little bit because he wants us to know that it was God who helped us and not some kind of chance coincidence that the wind ceased. The wind's been blowing for hours and hours and then it's gone. Oh, cool, sweet, now we can go. And we go on our merry way, never knowing that it was Jesus who did it for us, you know? So I think sometimes we have to be patient and we have to keep persevering, waiting for God to show up. Now, there is something significant about walking on the sea. Had anybody ever done this before in the biblical narrative? Yeah, you're actually very good. In the Old Testament, the only person ever described to appear on the waters is God. So you have the Genesis story and you have Job 9, verse 8, as well as Job 38:16. So only God can walk on water. So Jesus walks on water. Like, can you put two and two together? What does that mean? Jesus is God, right? This is incredible. It's one thing to say, oh, I'm God, and it's another thing to do things that only God can do, right? So that's kind of shocking. The verse that really hit home for me is this last clause. It says this, and he intended to pass them by. Have you guys ever noticed that before? When I first saw that, I was like, that's jacked up. Like, it's like you see a slow Prius on the freeway, and you're like, I'm going to pass you by because I don't get to be slowed down by you, right? Why would Jesus want to avoid his disciples?
How does Mark know that Jesus wanted to avoid the disciples too?
Yeah, you're asking way too advanced of a question here.
I think it's possible he was gonna stop the storm for them, or he was hoping maybe they would see him and remember they were there and remember that he is with them anyway, and maybe they would get through the storm without him stopping it. And then, yeah.
Maybe he was just gonna like walk across the water to Bethsaida or wherever they were at.
Oh, yeah.
That was his mode of transportation.
That's for a long time.
And he just saw that.
I thought that. I was like, the disciples are rowing in their boat and they're struggling, and Jesus was going to like take the fast lane, the HOV, and like walk across. And he'd get there and like, hey guys, you guys made it. After like 2 days, you know? Now, when I first noticed it, I was very bewildered by it, right? Now, in the Old Testament, God has passed people by before. When has God passed a person by?
Exodus 34.
Exodus 34? When was that? What was that about?
Is that
What did you say?
Oh, I was gonna say, isn't there like a covenant between the Israelites where he's like, cover your eyes and then I'll walk through you, like pass by you?
Yeah, very close. Yeah, Moses asks to see God. And God says, you can't, but I'm going to pass you by. My glory will pass you by, and you'll see my back. There's also another instance where God passes by too, in the Old Testament. Where else? Oh yeah, that's a good one. No, I'm thinking of Elijah in the mountains. God passes by. He sees the fire, he sees the wind, but God's not in the fire and God's not in the wind. But when God passes by, Elijah hears a whisper, right? So this is mind-blowing for me. Jesus intends to pass his disciples by in the same manner that God's glory passes by Moses and Elijah. Why? I think that when Jesus was going to pass his disciples by, he wanted to display the glory of God to his followers, which would drastically change their perspective of them. Right? They're rowing, they're doubting, they're wondering why all of this, and all of a sudden they see like a bright sunshine like coming across the sea, and they see the glory of God. That is a sublime moment, right? It's an experience of the beautiful. It's an encounter with God's glory, and that's supposed to encourage them to say that, you know what? If Jesus is God, we can make it across the sea. If Jesus is God, then he can feed thousands and thousands of people with barely anything. If Jesus is God, he can make something out of nothing. It's supposed to give him confidence, you know? So we can think about Moses' example. Moses was called to rescue millions of Hebrews out of Egypt. He needed a little assurance. Elijah was being persecuted by people. He was about to get killed. He needed some assurance. So how does God assure Moses and Elijah? He passes them by. He shows them his glory. He didn't give them some rational argument like, hey, I'm strong, I'm all powerful, I'm all knowing, you'll be fine. No, he doesn't encourage them with a rational argument. He doesn't encourage them by giving them a book to read, the scriptures. He encourages them by showing them his glory and his beauty. And that would be enough. But it doesn't have the same effect on the disciples. On seeing him upon the sea, they thought it's a phantom. It's a ghost. And they cried out, for they all saw him and were disturbed. Sometimes I feel like God shows up and we are terrified of him. So earlier, when Jesus feeds the 5,000, he does something that's like an echo of someone prior, right? Who else in the Old Testament was able to feed thousands and thousands of people? Yes, God through Moses, right? So it appears as if Jesus is like a Moses. But now, Jesus is walking on water. So he's like more than a Moses, more than a human figure, one of the greatest Israelite figures ever. He appears to be like God, right? And they're blown away. They are shocked. They're terrified. Can you imagine, like, seeing the glory of God in a person that you thought was only a person? And you'd be shocked, you know? They had experienced these miracles before. They'd seen exorcisms, they had seen healing, they had seen like provision from hardly any food and fish, and they still didn't get it. And I feel like we're a lot like the disciples. We see God do stuff for our lives, He blesses us so much, and yet when hard times come, we doubt Him. And yet when He shows up, we're like, oh, what's going on? We don't like this. You know what I'm saying? We're very much like the disciples. We get terrified at things that we shouldn't be, and we're afraid at stuff that we shouldn't be. They lack the faith and they lack the understanding, and we're not that different. So, what's the first thing that Jesus does? Does He stop the wind right away? What does He do? He doesn't get on boat. No, that's a different story. Not in this one, not in Mark. Immediately, He spoke with them. I don't know about you, but if there's a fire going on, the first thing I want you to do to help me is to take the fire extinguisher and blow out the flames. I don't want you to give me a lecture. Right? But for some reason, Jesus doesn't stop the problem first. The first thing He does, He talks to them. He says, it's me. It is I. Don't be afraid. Take heart. What the heck, Jesus? Stop the wind. Why can't you deal with the problem first and then teach us the lesson? I think it's because the lesson is more important than the miracle. The lesson is not God can stop your problems. The lesson is you have to learn to trust me, to trust my guidance and my direction, to trust me to keep going and not to doubt, right? He says, take heart. I think Jesus wants to comfort His disciples. I think He wants to comfort you wherever you're at. He wants to assure you that whatever struggle you're going through, that when He's with you, you can overcome it. This phrase here, it is I. In Greek, it is ego eimi. What does that mean? What's the significance of that? Do you know? You have like a knowing smile.
Yeah, it's the same phrase, I am.
Yep, in Greek it means I am. And in Hebrew, when somebody says I am, like big alerts and flags start flying. Because only God's allowed to say that. When Moses asks, what's your name? God says, ego eimi. So Jesus does things that only God can do. He walks on water. And He says things that only God should say. Right? There are some skeptics out there that say that Jesus never claimed to be God. I beg to differ. Right here. He says, don't be afraid. I think, a lot of times we have such insecurity, myself included. We have doubts, we have fears, and those things take over. They take over our hearts. And we don't trust God to take care of us, right? I think we're all broken in some way or another. So this is the last verse. He got onto the boat with them. This is incredibly profound for me, right? Like, Jesus doesn't fix our problems from a distance. That's actually not the answer. The answer is that Jesus comes to us. He joins us in our situation. This is what it means for it to be incarnational, right? He didn't expect us to go up to heaven and find Him there. Heaven comes down and meets us here. Jesus joins them in the boat. He doesn't abandon His followers to danger. He doesn't let them go fully to exhaustion. He joins them at the right moment, and He helps them through the difficulties of that situation, right? And then the wind ceased. Finally, After the lesson, after Jesus' presence is there, then the wind ceased. That's great. But notice that, like, the wind stopped, but Jesus didn't magically transport the boat to the other side of the lake, right? The disciples still had to keep rowing. So there's this mixture of what God does for us and what we do with God. It's both. It's a partnership. That's just how God works. Earlier I told you that I felt really stupid, right, with my PhD and my struggles, and how, like, I'm delayed, and how, like, the longer I stay in school, the less I can work and provide for my family, right? I was in such a pit of despair that this passage was just, you got the joke. It's because we're of that generation. I should have done it with the cough. Dang it. I was wondering, like, God, where are you? Why did you call me to this path? Is it even worth it? I should have never started the PhD. I should just quit now, walk away with just a master's in theology, because they can give you like a pity degree if you wanted to, if you don't make it all the way. I had such little faith, and when I read this passage, I just thought, wow, I'm not doing this alone. God sees me even if I don't see him. And there are constant reminders around me of God's beauty and God's glory. I mean, if God can create like a human cell that that contains more information than like a bunch of encyclopedia books, I can trust him. I think he knows what he's doing, right? If God can create beauty in nature or in art or in humanity, like, I think God knows what he's doing. I think that God's with me all the time. God can create something out of nothing. And I think that led me to a greater sense of trust. So let me summarize this for you. I think this story is meant for anybody who's weary and discouraged and disappointed, who are in the pits of despair. Maybe you have a long and obstacle-ridden journey, and you're broken, you're feeble, you feel inadequate, and all that. Jesus sees us, and he knows our struggle. He cares about us. He wants to join us on the journey. If he called you to it, you're going to finish it. That's what I've been telling myself, right? If he called you to it, he's going to help you finish it. You got to keep working hard, though. You can't give up. You got to keep going. And if we have the eyes to see God's glory, if we don't get terrified by it, if we don't dismiss it, maybe we can let God's beauty and God's glory assure us that God's there, that God's good enough. He's able. God's glory assured Moses that God's able to rescue the Israelites out of Egypt. God's glory assured Elijah that he wouldn't meet a horrible demise at the hands of Jezebel. And then Jesus' glory assured the disciples that they'd make it across the sea. No matter what comes our way, Jesus is the way. Amen? I hope that encourages you as you go back to the daily routine that you have. God's glory is with you.